Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about cloud migration and the role of the CIO with special guest Doug Bourgeois. All right, let's talk about like a typical journey for like cloud migration in an organization. Where am I gonna land with this?
Yeah, I think, and we've seen this pattern, replicated and repeated many, many times over, the last decade. But I would say that the methodologies, the tools, and even the experience have matured a lot in the last 5-6 years to extremely repeatable processes, right? But when we talk about migrating to the cloud, the first thing is to really decide what your priorities are for migration to the cloud. Because unless you're the smallest of organization with a handful of systems, which of course there are, organizations like that. But if you're a large organization, a large enterprise, and you have a fairly substantial portfolio, this is something that is going to happen in stages or waves or in phases. It's not going to happen in one big move. So the first step is really to understand what you have and to do, whether you call it discovery or assessment, is some sort of a double click on your portfolio and prioritize which systems are going to move to cloud, first. And that, doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't take a lot of resource, and it doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort, but it's critically important to go ahead and do that, because what you don't want to do, and I'll use a very extreme example, you don't want to pick the mainframe as the first system to move to the cloud. There's a lot of things that need to be done to get that ready to go to the cloud, right? You want to pick something on the other end of the spectrum, a little more self-contained, more modern technologies, maybe, public-facing web applications, things like that, or email systems, things like that.
Are there other criteria that you use to determine, that you would suggest using to determine whether something goes to the cloud or not? Besides, hey, I like the newer ones. That makes sense. The mainframe, there's a lot of moving parts, so probably not right away. What other criteria would you look at for making that determination on the individual workloads? Yeah,
this is something that is a specific example of one of the things that has matured quite a bit in the last 5-6 years or so. And I know personally in my practice here at Deloitte, we've developed and we've continue to invest in tools that help us accelerate that process. And these tools are discovery tools that will either grab, automatically through scans or ingest through a variety of formats, a very, very broad set of data that goes into an analytics model that runs an algorithm and looks at basically a complexity factor and kind of rank stacks all of the systems, into these different categories. But under the covers, a lot of what's happening is, things like integration points, right? You want to understand what those integration points are. You want to understand the configuration of these existing systems. What software components are in there? What versions are they? Is there something that's incompatible from a middleware perspective, as an example, that the cloud can't support? You want to know those sorts of things. A lot of times these applications are somewhat families. They kind of, they're chatty within the family, and they don't necessarily talk to other families so much. So you need to look at where the boundaries are. Compliance zones are important as well. So some applications have more than one compliance framework that they have to live in, like PCI or HIPAA as an example, or FedRAMP, different things like that. IRS 1075. I mean, there's all kinds of different compliance, frameworks that these systems have to live within. So that also is a factor, right? Because when you build out the cloud environments, the landing zones, which is basically step 2, right? You figure out what's going first, and you prioritize, this particular one compliance family will focus on that first. You build that cloud to those requirements.
Standard, yeah.
And then you know exactly what is the specific subset of the portfolio that can move to that particular enclave, right?
Have you ever had the situation where you're half pregnant on this move and you're going like, I can't move this other half of this, and you're stuck in this multi-cloud world or this hybrid world now where maybe I do have a compliance zone in HIPAA, but I didn't realize there was some of that information sitting on a mainframe I can't move, but the rest have already moved to the cloud. How do you relegate that? How do you solve that problem?
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate in that we haven't experienced that, but it's because of the maturity in the discovery tools and the analysis that goes behind it. So we've had some cases where we've had to do a fairly substantial amount of pre-migration prep work, changes to the systems to get them ready to shift to the cloud. And so and that goes to the waves, right? The first wave is always the easiest. It's the least amount of tweaking and modifications that need to be made before those systems are ready to go. The second wave has a little bit more. You may be upgrading operating systems. You may be even changing operating systems, and doing some replatforming from that vantage point. You may be swapping out to a different type of database, tools, and then moving those over. And that's kind of the third wave, which is maybe what I would call more antiquated client server or proprietary architectures. I won't name any, but I think we're familiar with them.
Yes, we are.
and those get harder, right? Those require, some considerable re-architecture in some cases. And I know for one particularly complicated client, we did spend, a number of months, if not, 6 months or more, preparing those systems for, their cloud readiness, so they would be easier to.
I like how you called it cloud readiness, because I've seen some organizations that said, I'm just going to move to the cloud over the weekend. I'm just going to copy my VMs up there and I'm done. But you can do that in the first wave, possibly, right? But once you hit the second and third wave, you start understanding, as your discovery tools have found, right, that there's interdependencies between applications and network, hard-coded IP paths. We've never done that before, right? Or
Exactly.
host tables that have been, monkeyed around with directly. So I think it's great that you guys have these tools to help, because that lift and shift mentality really only applies to a very small number of migrations. And I love the term that you said, cloud ready, not cloud optimized, just cloud ready, because that can happen later. Yeah. That
comes later. Yeah. And in most cases, as you point out, right, like you said, the first wave is fairly straightforward. It almost is, over a small period of time to transition those to the cloud. They're already virtualized. In some cases, you're shifting between formats of the virtualization, but it's really not that complicated, when you get down to it. And those go very quickly. And so that the people who talk about moving their entire data centers to the cloud in a number of days or weeks are people that I think are familiar with phase one, but they haven't had to live through some of these other phases where there's a progressively complicated amount of work to get them those systems ready for the cloud. Phase two, as you started to refer to, it's almost like post-migration optimization, right? So, in a lot of cases, there's, the drivers to the cloud are very business driven, not necessarily technology. There's timing on things. Sometimes it's leases on major buildings that include data centers that clients are like, I'm getting out of this building, our lease expires. We don't want to extend the lease just for the data center. Our people have, in today's age, they've gone virtual, but pre the pandemic, people were still thinking about, shifting their physical office locations and things like that. And we have, a lot of clients who had kind of burning platforms to get to the cloud based on other business drivers such as that. And so in those cases, you're not optimizing before you move to the cloud. You're making it cloud ready enough so that you can go ahead and successfully execute the migration. But once you get there, now you've got to optimize, because the cost drivers in the cloud are different than the cost drivers in the legacy data center. And you don't want to run up a bill that the business doesn't expect and can't afford. And so then post-migration optimization actually should be part of the process of the thinking, instead of I just move things from here to there and then I'm done, which is a suboptimal way to look at the problem.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, the optimization thing, because I do have a lot of customers myself that they're like, hey, cloud was supposed to be cheaper. But I'm glad how you said the cost models are different than an on-prem cloud or on-prem data center compared to a public cloud. Because you're paying for something, whether it's being used or not in the public cloud, where that cost in your data center is kind of hidden.
Right? Yeah, it's very hidden. And, when you make, once you make the upfront capital investment in the legacy environment, your operating run costs, to maintain those licenses are a very small percentage of the initial investment, right? And the cloud, it's different, right? Because it's pretty much it's a rental agreement. It goes on in perpetuity as long as you're using it. It goes up if you grab more resources. It goes down if you give some back. And so what that translates to, at least in my mind, is when you take the legacy systems, right? The architectural, whether it was intentional or not, one of the overarching architectural principles that went into many legacy systems was, if there's a problem, throw more memory or throw more CPU or throw more storage at it, right? That's the way that we solved a lot of problems. And the reason we did that is because it worked, to a certain extent. Architectural sins can be hidden through capacity and additional capability, and we did that, right? And so the point I'm making is that was what went into these legacy systems. And when we just lift them up, these very inefficiently architected systems, and move them to the cloud, now we're running a rental agreement in these kind of high resource intensive systems, and they've never been optimized in that way. And so the cost model is way, way, way higher than it actually needs to be or should be.
Well, and some of the cost optimization can be a process change. There was a great study that was done up in Canada where they did a lift and shift of an SAP instance into the cloud, and their cost went through the roof. And then they realized, well, we don't use this instance in the middle of the night, so they actually put it to sleep. And then they said, well, we don't use this instance on the weekends, so they went from a 24/7 model to a 16/5 model. And they saved a boatload of money. And they're like, oh, wow, this is a different, so you don't even have to get down to changing code, but just the way that you're using the systems. Or before we would just keep them running all the time. Now maybe you don't need to. Maybe you can do that approach.
Actually, to me, that's a great example of small level of effort, high value return, right? Because once you move to the cloud, there's very simple policy mechanisms that you can invoke that will do just that, right? That will, if this virtual server is unutilized for an hour, whatever, shut it down. Or you can do it based on a schedule, right? If you know what the business schedule looks like, right? So those things are very fundamental, not that difficult to employ, but can save a good chunk of money right out of the gate. While you're doing the longer term re-architect things, which take more time than ever.
But that's a mentality change that we have to have, right? That, as you said before, we're already 40 years into architecting these systems, right? To be on all the time and to be highly redundant. And I love how we're throwing more memory and CPUs at it because, hey, Intel gets paid, right? When that happens. But we would rather the money that you save be used for new ways of doing things and new channels of deploying new products or monetization strategies, whatever it is. So we want to see companies succeed by using these models.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's what excites me about, what the emerging trend is with cloud right now, because I think we're beginning to see, I think finally, I'm a dozen years into this, and we're finally beginning to see the drivers of the next wave as it pertains to cloud are outside of the infrastructure. And it's no longer just the infrastructure, value prop or, the benefits there. It's more coming from the organization and their business strategy or their mission strategy to the technology to enable what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I'd say, even in, there's a ton of disruption going on in the business world right now. I mean, we all see it, we live it. There's these technologies driven from that perspective are creating new businesses, right? So new businesses are emerging through this modernization, very transformative, mindset that's coming from business leaders. And then we're seeing, legacy type companies trying to compete with these new business models. And so they're driving from a business perspective as well. And then now, just look at it through the government landscape, right? I mean, the whole government operating model has changed fundamentally as well. I mean, we're not immune to anything that's going on out with the pandemic as well. Plus you have at the federal level administration change, whole new set of priorities, all of these things driving towards citizens, end user experience, transformative training programs. I mean, all of these different things that are business driven. And now that's coming in, and where do we meet, right? We meet at the application level, which is where I think the next wave is really focused on. And I think you are kind of alluding to that as well.
Yeah, no, I think we are in a major shift, and we can blame COVID for it, frankly. I've never seen IT organizations move so fast or be given permission to move so fast on their strategies. It's not that COVID changed our direction. It just accelerated the direction we were already headed in a very extreme way. It's amazing what I've already seen just in 12 months of this pandemic on the change that's happened. Whole new industries are formed where they stalled before, like telemedicine. My goodness. Telemedicine's wide open now. Right? I mean, it's incredible how fast it developed, and it had been sitting there stagnant for 5 or 6 years, and all of a sudden it's not. So perfect example of a new business model that has now become the norm, where it existed. Your point is well taken. It existed before, because people weren't interested in changing their approach to things, but then forced circumstances said, hey, you kind of have to. And then people did it, and they realized, hey, this actually works. I don't want to go see the doctor. Yeah, I'd rather just see him on a Zoom call or that's a whole lot better than picking up some other disease in their office. Right?
Exactly. People start to see the value of trying out these different models, and then everyone else, right? So now the entire industry adopts that model, and now that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is innovation, transformative innovation is occurring, in the cloud. And I've said this for a long time, but now it's actually happening, right? I've had this little saying is that cloud is where innovation happens, right? And now we're actually seeing it, right? Because a lot of the systems have been moved to the cloud, and now all these new capabilities, whether it's virtual access or new systems to support that, a lot of embedded analytics in the systems now based on some of these transformative working arrangements as well, and other use cases driving that too.
Hey, this has been wonderful talking. We most definitely want you back on the show again. You bring a lot of great insight into this whole innovation, cloud technology. So Doug, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Darren. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy chatting with you about the advancements and current trends in technology.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and do something wonderful.